When I awakened, the story was already nearing its end. The favorite heroine had received the love of everyone, including my dad, my brother, and my fiancé. Meanwhile, I lay on a hospital bed, barely alive. Just as I was about to fall into the coma described in the book, a figure suddenly appeared before my bed. A young man, full of youthful vigor, looked down at me with an arrogant smirk. "Have you forgotten me?" he asked. "Childhood sweethearts never betray. Camille, I'll take you back to kill them." I was on the brink of death. On the day Clara was engaged to my fiancé Chad, I had a car accident. To be precise, he should be my ex-fiancé. After all, 3 days ago, Chad had pulled Clara in front of me and said, "Camille, love cannot be forced. I did think about convincing myself to love you, but I really can't." Clara looked at me with tears streaming down her face. "Sister Camille, I'm sorry." She was incredibly beautiful, the kind of girl who looked fragile and captivating. As she spoke, the tears that had built up in her eyes began to fall one by one. The Lee family has taken care of me for so many years, and I should be grateful. But Chad and I are truly in love. I can't give him up to you. I watched them with a blank expression, thinking that they shouldn't come to me to cry about such things. The Lee family and the Kin family had a business marriage. If they wanted to break the engagement, they should talk to the elders of both sides. But then I realized my dad and brother would definitely stand by Clara unconditionally. As expected, that night, when they told my brother Carter about it, he didn't even frown and agreed without hesitation. "Clara is also a young lady of the Lee family," Carter said with a smile. "The marriage between the Lee and Kin families is the same no matter who marries in. There's no need to cancel the engagement banquet. Clara can just go directly." In just 2 days, my fiancé had become Clara's fiancé. She would walk toward the man I once loved, wearing the wedding dress I had designed for myself on the day I had carefully chosen. They even forced me to attend the ceremony. But there was no chance for that anymore. My vision was drenched in red. I could only vaguely hear the chaotic sounds of people and the buzzing of the ambulance. Perhaps this was for the best. I exhaled wearily, feeling a strange sense of relief. In the hospital, my spirit floated high above, silently watching the medical staff bustling around my bedside. The patient's injuries aren't severe, but her will to survive is very weak. Have we contacted her family? A nurse held my phone, having found the top emergency contact. Her eyes lit up. "It's almost done. This is the patient's brother's number." "Hello." I on the other end. The person didn't even wait for her to finish and sneered. "Camille, where are you now? It's Clara's engagement day. Do you have to cause everyone to be unhappy? Do you think if you throw a tantrum and don't show up, you can make Clara uncomfortable?" His tone was icy, his voice mocking. "Chad doesn't like you. No matter how much you struggle, it's useless." Before the nurse holding the phone could react, she hurriedly hung up. The doctor's expression turned grays. The patient's vital signs are not optimistic. The emergency room became chaotic again. My spirit, floating in the air, felt increasingly tired and heavy. I repeatedly told myself, "Didn't you already anticipate this? You are just a supporting character used to highlight Clara in this novel. The people around you were born to love Clara. No matter what you do, they will always only see Clara. You know this. So why are you still sad?" Waves of doubt and questioning surged over me, just as I was about to be engulfed in a prolonged darkness. A clear voice broke through. "Camille." The nurse stopped him outside the ward, scanning him from head to toe. "Are you the patient's brother?" The young man froze for a moment, as if understanding something, then exploded in anger. "Who's her good-for-nothing brother? Tell her Bane is back. If she can't sleep, she should get up and take a few steps. I'll take her back to kill them." Bane? I searched through the haze in my mind and finally remembered this person. But how could he be back? In fact, in the beginning, I had a good relationship with Carter. But then Clara arrived. She didn't have the surname Lee at that time. I couldn't remember her exact surname. I only remembered that the 16-year-old girl looked as fragile as a trembling flower bud on a branch. She shrank behind my dad, carefully observing me and Carter. My dad smiled at Carter, and me. Carter. Camille. This is Clara, the daughter of an old friend of mine. Last month, her mother passed away from overwork, and she has no one to take care of her. I brought her over to keep you company. Okay? Before I could say anything, Carter spoke up first, coldly mocking, Jane. What are you pretending for? Who doesn't know that before my mom died, you were already entangled with your first love? He looked down at Clara, his eyes icy. This girl claims to be a friend's orphan, but she's really just the illegitimate child of you and that mistress. Isn't she? Clara's face instantly turned pale. My dad, poked at his core concern, stuttered for a moment before gradually regaining his voice. Carter, how can you say that about your dad? Carter curled his lips. You know the truth in your heart. You, alive and son-in-law, can't even understand what it means to eat soft rice. I genuinely look down on you. After saying that, he shot a glance at the pale-faced girl, turned, and went upstairs without looking back. We didn't like Clara, but we couldn't get rid of her, since I hadn't reached adulthood yet, and Carter had just joined the company. All the shares were temporarily in my dad's hands. We didn't have the power to oppose. The next morning at breakfast, my dad sought our opinions on giving Clara the Lee surname. Carter immediately slammed down his chopsticks. Don't get carried away. Your illegitimate daughter should keep her surname Jean. Don't come and tarnish my mom's surname. Clara trembled in fear at Carter's fury, tears streaming down her face uncontrollably. Carter looked at her coldly, his eyes devoid of any extra compassion. I was certain that, at that moment, Carter felt the same strong rejection towards this unfamiliar Clara as I did. What I didn't know was that Clara was the heroine of a popular, coddled darling novel. No one would ever truly hate her forever, including Carter. That year, I was also 16, having started school a year earlier than Clara, while my dad was busy paying her school fees, forcing her into the same high school I attended despite her failing scores. I was preparing for my first provincial math competition. From a young age, I knew I was much more sensitive to numbers than the average person. Therefore, pursuing a path to university through math competitions was something I had decided on as soon as I entered high school. However, at that time, I was only a sophomore, and the school's resources for competition training were primarily geared towards seniors. Even the teacher assigned to tutor me just hoped I would adapt to the environment during my sophomore year, without expecting me to immediately receive a top-to-acceptance letter. The senior competition would be my main battleground, as countless students before me had done. But I wasn't willing to wait. Graduating a year earlier meant I could enter the company's core earlier. So, after confirming the competition date, I began a dual approach. I tried my best to complete a regular high school student's academic tasks during the day. After classes at night, I would rush to my room to utilize the brief time for competition training. I was as busy as a spinning top, while Clara seemed as carefree as a sparrow. She started to show her goodwill towards Carter, bringing him freshly heated milk at 10 o'clock every night without fail. Initially, Carter deliberately ignored her, not responding no matter how much she knocked on the door. But Clara was remarkably persistent. If Carter ignored her, she would just keep knocking for half an hour straight, creating an endless series of loud knocks that drove me crazy. One time, Carter was fed up, opened the door, and snatched the milk from her, drinking it all in one go. Is that enough? I've finished it all. Can you please stop bothering me from now on? His words were harsh, but Clara smiled joyfully. At that time, I hadn't realized that one act of kindness would lead to countless breaches of principle. Clara eventually noticed I was still standing by the door. She turned around and cautiously looked at me. Sister Camille, I forgot about you. Do you want some milk too? I didn't prepare any for you today. But I can bring you some tomorrow. Okay? I crossed my arms and looked at her, calmly saying, I don't need your milk. I came out to tell you that you can knock more quietly from now on. I'm preparing for an important exam, and I hope you won't disturb me. Clara bit her lip in embarrassment and whispered, Got it. Carter, standing nearby, glanced at us, his eyes flickering. But in the end, he said nothing. It turned out that Clara's, got it, was only verbal. And next evening, just before midnight, she came knocking on the second floor again. This time, she knocked on my door. I had just fallen asleep when I was startled awake by the persistent knocking. I closed my eyes and endured for a while. But the knocking continued. I checked my phone, it was just past 12. If I didn't calm Clara down soon, I wouldn't get a good night's sleep, and my study efficiency for the next day would suffer. I got out of bed and opened the door to find Clara standing outside with a cup of milk. Sister Camille. She called me timidly. I brought you some milk. Drinking it will help you sleep. I thought to myself that if she hadn't come to disturb me, I would have already been asleep. I tried to patiently explain. I've already said I don't need your milk. You don't need to bring it to me anymore. Besides, I just rinsed my mouth. So you should drink this cup yourself. Clara's eyes immediately turned red. But I heated it up for you. Just drink a little, okay? She reached out to hand it to me, and I instinctively blocked it. Unfortunately, the milk spilled all over her, scalding her arms and turning her skin red. She let out a yelp, startling Carter next door. What are you causing a scene about now? He scolded Clara with a frown. But his gaze unconsciously wandered into my room. He was looking for the medical kit I kept. I stood silently as I watched Carter apply ointment to her burn. Clara was in tears as she thanked him. After that night, Clara still didn't give up on delivering milk. After being woken up by her for a whole week, I finally couldn't take it anymore. I suggested to my dad and Carter that I rent a place to live off campus. Carter looked at me with a complex expression. Do you really have to do this? I nodded firmly. I couldn't be certain Clara had any malicious intent. But this competition was incredibly important to me. I couldn't afford any mistakes. I quickly completed the rental procedures, moved out, and began focusing entirely on competition preparation. That period was undoubtedly the happiest and most fulfilling time of my life. Without Clara and the trivial matters of the company, I had a group of like-minded partners working together for the same goal. That's when I met Chad. He was in the same grade as me, competing in math competitions and coming from a similar background. Naturally, he knew some things about my family situation. At that time, Chad said to me, Camille, you have good grades and strong abilities. What's there to be afraid of? When the results of this competition come out, your dad will see which daughter can bring him glory. The youthful Chad had a sparkle in his eyes, his gaze unwavering as he looked at me. I could clearly feel that Chad viewed me differently then. Otherwise, I wouldn't have agreed without hesitation when later asked about marriage prospects. Fortunately, the final results of the competition did not disappoint my long-standing efforts. I became the only sophomore in my cohort to be selected for the provincial team and win a national award. Just when I was eager to share this good news with Carter, I discovered that many things had changed dramatically in ways I hadn't noticed. The day I returned home was a rare sunny day. A grand feast was set up both inside and outside the villa. Uncle Wayne, the butler, saw me come back and immediately beamed, sending other servants to tell Carter. Soon after, Carter came out. I didn't ask him who the banquet was for. I just took off my backpack and pulled out the contract to show him. Carter took it, flipping through a couple of pages. For some reason, I felt that his emotions didn't seem as joyful as he portrayed. He asked me, Camille, signing this contract means you're guaranteed admission to top 2, right? I nodded. Are you going to report this year? If not, maybe wait another year. After all, you're only in your second year of high school. And there's a lot of knowledge you might not have mastered yet. No. I want to go. I interrupted Carter. Brother. Graduating a year earlier means I can help you in the company a year earlier. Carter was silent for a long time before finally forcing a smile. If you want to go, then go. Anyway, you're so talented. Those people on the board must be looking forward to you graduating soon. He shoved the contract back into my hands. Just one thing, when you go in later, don't let Clara see this contract. Her scores weren't good in the last monthly exam. And today is a day to celebrate her new surname. Don't ruin her mood. I halted abruptly, incredulously looking at Carter. You agreed to let Clara change her surname to Lee? Carter shrugged indifferently. Yeah. It's just a surname. If she wants to take it, let her. That way, people won't look down on her. I didn't say anything then, but I vaguely realized that things seemed to be speeding towards an irreversible direction. I hadn't expected to have another chance to wake up. According to the plot, my ultimate fate as the villainess who bullied the heroine was to be lost in chaos, unable to disturb the happy lives of the main couple. Yet, amidst the heavy darkness, I could always hear Bane reciting something in his teasing voice. Once there was a woman who desperately wanted a small and adorable child. So she consulted a witch, and the witch agreed to grant her wish, giving her a grain of wheat to plant in a flower pot. Clifford. What kind of story is this? It's so old-fashioned. She's heard it countless times already. How do you expect her to wake up from me reading this? The only fairy tales I could find are these. Even if you kill me now, I can't come up with a new story. A man named Clifford replied. And besides, the old ones aren't necessarily bad. Look, Miss Camille is awake. Isn't she? Sure enough. Just during Bane and Clifford's conversation, I suddenly opened my eyes without warning. Bane clearly didn't believe what he said and turned around to see what was happening. His gaze met mine. You. He stammered for a long moment, then suddenly blinked, tears glistening in his eyelashes. Camille. You're awake. His voice was a bit hoarse, sounding similar to my dry throat right now. I parted my lips slightly, and Bane quickly snapped back to reality, pouring me a cup of warm water. I had no strength in my hands, so I took a few sips with his help. After half a cup of warm water, I finally lifted my eyes to look at him, unsure of what to say. Bane set the cup down, his expression returning to that of a carefree demeanor. Why are you looking at me like that? He counted on his fingers. It's been so many years since we last saw each other. You must have forgotten me, right? I paused for a moment, then suddenly laughed. Bane. I haven't forgotten you at all. In the storyline, to illustrate Chad and Clara's deep affection for each other, it was said that I and Chad were childhood sweethearts. However, I didn't truly understand him, or empathize with him. Only Clara was his soulmate. Even though Chad was someone I had only met when I was 16. Outside of the storyline, Bane was my genuine childhood sweetheart. His family owned a chain of sports brands, and lived in the same villa area as mine. Bane wasn't particularly talented academically. You could say he had no talent at all. So throughout our years together, anyone in the same class as him would never worry about exam scores because Bane would always be at the bottom. But heaven is fair. While he didn't do well in his studies, his talent in football was astonishing. Not just the kind that dominated school-level competitions, but good enough to pursue a professional career. So, when he was 13, he went to trial at a club in Spain, and his family moved their domestic business abroad for his career. In the early years, he would occasionally return to the country, but once he turned 16 and joined the first team, constantly busy fighting for starting positions and matches, and later transferred to an English Premier League team for an exorbitant transfer fee, becoming a star player. He never came back again. Meanwhile, I began to learn about the internal affairs of the company and started preparing for competitions. Thus, like countless pairs of childhood sweethearts in the world, we grew older and followed to completely different paths. ultimately drifting apart. In all the storylines, Bane's name didn't even appear. But to me, he was a living person I had genuinely interacted with for over 10 years. I never imagined he would come back. I leaned back on the hospital bed after drinking enough water. "Why are you back?" Before Bane could speak, the blonde-haired, blue-eyed man beside him chimed in. "Miss Camille, it's the Aussie right now. Bane heard that you were getting engaged. So he specifically came back. He didn't expect to encounter such an incident." I turned to look at him, and he finally realized and started introducing himself. "Hello, Miss Camille. My name is Clifford. I was initially a reporter for the Sun newspaper, and now I'm Bane's life assistant." "Enough," Bane interrupted impatiently, pushing him out of my line of sight. "Don't bother her. If you're so idle, why don't you go downstairs and buy a fruit basket?" Clifford pouted and reluctantly closed the door as he left. Bane dragged his towel to sit by my bed, staring at me for a while before slowly speaking. "Camille, how could you let a mere illegitimate child bully you like this? You need to get better soon. Okay? Once you're well, I'll take you back to confront them." I silently looked at him, my gaze unwittingly carrying a hint of scrutiny. After a long time, I slowly said, "Bane, should I trust you?" He raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean by that? Just because we haven't seen each other for a few years, I no longer deserve your trust?" I pressed my lips together. It wasn't that I didn't trust him, but rather that I couldn't believe that in this world created specifically for Clara, there was anyone who would wholeheartedly believe in me and help me, just like the old Chad. Before he knew Clara, he had said similar things to me. But as soon as Clara appeared, all those words became meaningless. He even blamed me for not understanding him enough. At that moment, Clifford returned to the hospital room with a fruit basket. Bane picked through the fruits for a while, finally pulling out a bright red apple. He peeled the apple completely. Just when I thought he was going to hand it to me, I saw him pause, then cut a small piece and put it in his mouth. I looked at him in shock and confusion. Bane frowned and asked Clifford, "Why is it this mushy apple? She has never liked this kind since she was a child. Could you please go buy the crispy ones instead?" A sharp pang hit my heart, as if something had opened up my tear ducts, and a strong impulse to cry surged within me. I chose to tell Bane everything that had happened over the past few years. By the time I finished, a thin crescent moon was visible through the hostel window. Clifford had slumped on the sofa, fast asleep. I looked at Bane, whose expression was serious, and said slowly, "I think my car accident was not an accident." His gaze sharpened as he immediately lifted his eyes. I took another sip of water. "I had the accident on June 12th. But my car undergoes regular inspections and maintenance. The last time Uncle Wayne took it to the Ford store was on June 10th. But 2 days later, my brakes failed." "Bane, I really don't believe there's no problem here." Bane's brow furrowed tightly. "Do you think Uncle Wayne?" "I don't know. So I want to go back to the Lee family and test Uncle Wayne again. Besides, I left something there, and I need to get it back." At this point, Bane suddenly perked up. "You want to investigate, right?" He pulled Clifford up from the sofa, pointing at the sleepy-eyed man. Clifford is a professional. Although his previous work at the Sun was trash level in terms of sports transfers, he's spot on when it comes to celebrity scandals. He's a recognized TO level in the industry. If you have anything to investigate, just let him handle it. Clifford finally woke up, somewhat disgruntled, and retorted, "What do you mean trash? That was the expert analysis of my company. It's clearly you players who are fickle." Despite saying that, Clifford took on the job of investigating for me. He gave me an awkward gentlemanly bow. "But it's my honor to serve such a beautiful lady. Please wait for good news." I didn't have any major injuries, so after resting in the hospital for a few days, the doctor informed me that I could be discharged. But Bane insisted that I shouldn't move much. He went to handle my discharge paperwork and had Clifford find a moving company to help me with my luggage. I, who should have been the busiest, became the most idle, aimlessly wandering the hallway. At that moment, I heard the elevator doors opening behind me. Before I could turn around, I heard a familiar voice. Our Clara may seem delicate, but she's so healthy. Hey, Chad. I'm entrusting you with such a healthy and obedient little sister. If you dare to let her down, I definitely won't spare you. I looked over in shock and saw Carter with a gentle smile on his lips, his hands stroking Clara's smooth long hair. Standing next to the frail-looking Clara were my dad and Chad. My gaze fell on the diagnosis forms in their hands, and I quickly guessed that they had come to accompany Clara for a marriage checkup. They soon noticed my presence and immediately stopped in their tracks, subtly blocking Clara from view. When did you wake up? Carter was the first to challenge me. Frowning. Camille, how did you end up at the hospital? Chad almost simultaneously spoke. We won't hold it against you for not coming to the engagement banquet. But don't keep bothering me. There's no chance for us. I crossed my arms and coldly scanned them. I must clarify one thing. I didn't come to the hospital following you. I'm here because I'm feeling unwell and needed a checkup. And Chad, I need to remind you of something. You were the one who secretly dated Clara behind my back. Since finding out about this until now, we've only seen each other this one time. When have I bothered you? In your imagined dreams? Chad was momentarily speechless. After a while, he slowly spat out a few words, sharp-tongued as ever. You haven't changed a bit since high school. Carter pulled him aside. Why waste your breath on her? He turned to me. It's best you stay out of this. I know all about the project at the company. If you still have a conscience and don't want your mother's lifelong efforts to go to waste, you'd better withdraw quickly. I'll arrange for someone new to take over. I was taken aback for a moment, finally realizing he was talking about a project I had been following closely before my accident. Our family worked in fashion design. Half a year ago, we had secured a contract with the Kin family to create an entire line of sportswear. But before my accident, this project had been progressing steadily. Even if I had temporarily stepped back for a few days, the project team shouldn't have made any irreversible mistakes. The only discord was that during this time, Clara had been looking for various excuses to try to transfer to this group. Who is the new person? Clara? I looked at them, speaking slowly. Carter's expression stiffened for a moment, but he quickly relaxed again. So what if it's Clara? She's the future young mistress of the Kin family. No one is more suitable than her to take over this project. The company values capability. I replied. If you believe in her that much, let her lead another group. Then both proposals can be submitted to Ms. Faithy, and she can choose whichever version she prefers. Indeed, the person coordinating from the Kin family was Chad's aunt, Faithy, not Chad himself. This was my leverage in making such a request. Finally, Clara, who had been silent, spoke up. Her eyes were slightly red as she whispered, Sister Camille, aren't you putting me in a difficult position? Aunt Faithy has watched you grow up. She will definitely lean toward you over me. Chad and Carter were about to interject when a bright voice came from behind. Wow. What's with all the commotion in the hospital? Bain came over from the hallway, holding a payment slip. When he reached my side, he casually draped his arm over my shoulder and shot a glance around at the others. Tell me, do you all lack any sense of morality? This is a hospital, not your home. How can you chatter away here while other patients are trying to rest? Do you have bad intentions? Bain's words were rather absurd. This floor was filled with VIP wards, and there were usually very few patients. My hospitalization had made me the only occupant on this floor, but Clara didn't catch that point. She glanced at me and then softly retorted, But Sister Camille is talking too, isn't she? Bain dug at his ears, sounding impatient. Sounds are different. I'm happy to hear Camille's voice, but yours annoys me. Bain hadn't read much and lacked refinement. and his sarcasm was sharp and bitter. Clara was stung by his words, and tears began to fall from her eyes. Camille, who is this person to you? Chad tightly embraced the tearful Clara, looking complexly at Bane's hand resting on my shoulder. I opened my lips to speak, but Bane beat me to it. Do we even need to ask? You can tell just by looking. I'm Camille's only childhood sweetheart. He raised his eyebrows, emphasizing the word only. I clearly saw Chad's hand tighten around Clara. Clara, who had been sobbing, abruptly stopped, looking up in shock. I grew up with her and have never seen you. If anyone is a childhood sweetheart, it should be me. Chad's tone was flat, revealing no anger or joy. Bane pulled out his phone to check the time, sounding somewhat impatient. Stop trying to embellish your story. You only met her when you were 16. That doesn't count as growing up together. Chad's face turned pale with anger. Why is everyone so foolish? Talking to you all really lowers my IQ. Bane turned to me. Camille, can we leave? It's exhausting talking to a bunch of idiots. I remained silent for a moment before suddenly laughing and giving Bane an enthusiastic nod. After leaving the hospital, Bane started to book a ride on his phone. As he fidgeted with his phone, he asked me, "You're not mad at me for talking to them like that, are you?" I shook my head. No. Bane, you were really great. It's been so many years since we last saw each other, and your skills in verbal sparring hadn't diminished at all. I genuinely felt delighted. I had received the most orthodoxly education since childhood, which didn't teach me how to insult people. So, every time I encountered such situations, I would unconsciously steer the conversation toward a debating angle, and back and forth exchanges would only leave me feeling mentally and physically drained. But Bane was different. He didn't bother with logic. He just let loose with a stream of aimless chatter. Listening to him argue was a unique form of relaxation. Bane opened the ride-hailing app and glanced at me again. I'm about to call the car. Where are you going? You're not going back to that home of yours, are you? I'm not going back. I exhaled deeply. A place that still harbored a threat to my life was certainly somewhere I didn't want to set foot in again. But I need to go get something. Bane. You. I didn't say it outright, but he immediately understood what I meant. What are you thinking? Of course. I'll accompany you. You're the one I had to tell 16 stories to wake up. What if I'm not paying attention and you get plotted against again? When the boy said this, there seemed to be a spark of fire in his expressive brows, easily making people dizzy. I was no exception. Lost in thought. I suddenly had an idea these years. He had been soaring passionately across the green fields, chasing the highest honors, surrounded by the fans' frenzied love and admiration, which allowed him to retain a unique innocence and fearless determination that belonged solely to youth. In contrast to the young and composed elite ears around me, he was truly one of a kind. After arriving at the Lee family villa, we were greeted by Uncle Wang, the butler. He looked at me with a hint of panic, although he quickly lowered his gaze. I could tell from that one glance that my car accident was not an accident at all. I secretly gestured to Clifford, who immediately understood and started chatting with Uncle Wang. Bane directed the servants to pack my belongings. I went into my room alone, stood on a stool, and moved aside the few dust-covered hardcover books on the top shelf of the bookshelf. At the back of the shelf, I found a small iron box, about the size of my palm. I took the iron box in my hands and pried it open forcefully, revealing a silver USB drive lying inside. Only then did I let out a sigh of relief and tuck the USB drive into my pocket. Just as I was putting the books back in place and pushing the chair back to its original position, Bane's clear voice came through the window. Hey, Camille. Come here. Looking out the window, I saw the boy standing among the lush grass, with clusters of deep red and light purple hydrangeas blooming behind him. I walked downstairs to the courtyard and saw Bane excitedly pointing at the apple tree. Isn't this the tree I gave you when I was 16? I nodded. He continued. I remember I had just been promoted to the first team. But I was still young. And there were all these internationally renowned stars in the team. So I didn't get to play at all. I sat on the bench for a long time. But our coach was quite nice. He noticed I was in a bad mood and gave me a few days off, letting me relax and travel around Spain. I went to Columbus Square and La Rambla. It was packed with people and incredibly lively. Later, I learned that the St. George's Day in Catalonia was approaching, and they were all giving flowers. So I sent you one too. And it was the biggest one. I corrected him. That's an apple tree. Who says apple trees can't bloom? Bain retorted. And that's not the point. Do you know what St. George's Day is in Catalonia? I honestly shook my head. He sighed. Forget it. By the way, I remember I also sent a cat over at that time. Is it still around? He looked at me with focused anticipation. My throat suddenly felt a bit dry. Bain, the cat you sent me, is gone. That was when I truly began to loathe Clara from the bottom of my heart. When Bain sent the cat to me, I fell in love with that tiny creature at first sight. It was a silver tabby American Shorthair. Just 4 months old. I specially prepared a room for it, and built it decent-sized cat house in the yard, to allow it to roam freely. I even had the servants replace all the thorny roses in the yard with hydrangeas. I was so attentive to its care that even during the time I was out preparing for competitions, I would regularly instruct the maid to bathe it and trim its nails. The day Clara was injured was shortly after I had just trimmed its nails. Even if it had scratched Clara, it wouldn't have left such a deep and sharp wound. In fact, if Carter had just called to ask me, I would have told him I installed cameras. If he had checked, the truth would have been revealed. But he didn't even give me a chance to explain and unilaterally decided that it was my fault. My suspicions were confirmed that very night. Clara came to my bedroom under the pretext of bringing me hot porridge. She sat on my bed, cautiously looking at me. Sister Camille, the cat, has died. Don't be too sad or blame yourself. I'm fine. I looked at her coldly and stated outright. You were not scratched by the cat. She fell silent for a moment, still using her soft tone. But what she said was, "But Dad and my brother care about me." They certainly cared about her. Enough to repeatedly affirm her while denying me. The cat is really annoying. It always disturbs me. But my cat was very well behaved and rarely made noise. It would only make some sounds when I played with it during my leisure time. So she was hinting that I was the one who was annoying. That's what I thought at first. But when I raised my eyes, I met her cautiously probing gaze. Although she hid it quickly, I still caught it. But I didn't think much of it at that time. However, at this moment, as I spoke to Bain about it again, a strange thought suddenly occurred to me. It seemed Clara wasn't feeling annoyed with me. That look in her eyes was like she was probing whether I had seen something while I was playing with the cat in the yard. Something that could threaten her. So she was trying to warn me with the death of a cat. I rubbed my fingers over the USB drive in my pocket, feeling that things were starting to get interesting. Bain listened silently to my story, reached out his hand, but then hesitated in my dress for some reason. Hey, are you crying? I raised my hand to wipe my face and realized it was all cold. I'm sorry. I didn't protect it well. Bain looked down at me for a while. Don't be sad. So, do you still want to hold a cat again? I was puzzled but saw his eager expression and nodded. He immediately smiled. What a coincidence. He pulled off his loose jacket, revealing a black cotton t-shirt underneath. The pattern was self-printed and unmistakably featured a tabby cat, almost identical to the one he had sent me before. How about this? I'll let you borrow it for a while, so you won't cry. Okay? Get lost. I teased him with a laugh. But no matter what, my terrible mood was somewhat lifted by his lighthearted banter. After packing up everything in the villa, I suddenly realized I hadn't arranged my own accommodation. I opened my phone to check my other properties. Most of the apartments had been rented out at a low price to keep personnel on my team. This was also a way to win their loyalty. There were a few villas far in the suburbs, and it would be quite inconvenient to drag a whole bunch of luggage there now. Just as I was pondering this, Bane's lazy voice came from beside me. "Hey, Camille, can you do me a favor?" I turned to look at him. Bane was sitting beside me, resting his head against the car window, flipping through the competition material book from my high school. He clearly wasn't paying attention, but the pages rustled loudly. My family's properties were sold off while I was abroad for those 2 years. This time I returned and rented an apartment in the city. A large flat, 300 square meters, with rent nearly 40 to 50,000 a month. "Can you help me share some of it?" But he himself was one of the top stars, with a weekly salary of over £500,000. Not to mention that his parents managed a huge multinational brand. There was no way he would be short on money. I immediately realized he had noticed my predicament and awkwardly invited me to live with him. Seeing that I hadn't responded for a long time, he added, "Is it too expensive? How about I cover 9, and you cover 1? Does that work?" I looked at him with a complicated expression, my heart pounding. "Bane. Thank you," I whispered. He raised the book in his hand. "Then you can't raid this book for a blowjob. It's fair and square." Bane opened the door with the keys, and as soon as the living room lights were turned on, I heard a series of meow sounds. My calves itched, and when I looked down, I found a tabby cat circling around my feet, curiously gazing at me with its big, watery eyes, as if I were a stranger. "Bane?" My heart softened, and I looked up at Bane. He glanced at me and explained, "Oh, it's from the same litter as the one I gave you. That mother cat only had these 2. I kept one, and the other one is for you." I crouched down and gently stroked its glossy fur, apologizing in my heart for not protecting its sister well enough. "Help me feed it some cat food here. I'll go make your bed," I said. That night, I found it difficult to sleep in the unfamiliar environment. I got out of bed, planning to go to the balcony in the living room to get some fresh air. However, just as I opened the door slightly, I saw Bane squatting in the dark by the cat's nest in the corner, murmuring something to himself. He was so engrossed in what he was saying that he didn't notice the door had opened a crack. The boy's voice was slow and serious. "Remember, tomorrow morning, as soon as she comes out, you need to run up to her and cheer her up. Okay? But don't make a sound now. We don't want to disturb her sleep. If you can do that, I'll make you the same cat food I made in Manchester before. It's a fair trade." My eyes turned warm, and my throat felt choked, though I couldn't quite pinpoint the feeling. But I knew that the chilling wind I had longed for at 16 had, at this moment, crossed the Mediterranean's gentle waves and the vast Eurasian continent, finally reaching my heart at the age of 22. The next morning, I unexpectedly slept until after 10 o'clock. After breakfast, just as I was about to take out my laptop to handle some work, Bane called out, "Camille, don't turn on the computer." I frowned, looking at him questioningly. He seemed to realize his tone was often soft and his voice. "Camille, you've only just recovered. You don't have to pour your heart into your family's business like this." I sensed something strange and looked at his phone, which was flipped face down on the sofa, and walked over to pick it up. Hey, but he was too late to stop me. As soon as I grabbed his iPhone, which had my Face ID recorded, the screen lit up, revealing an Orenburg Weibo trending topic list. The top 2 topics were rich girls secretly in love come true and villainous supporting character in the story. The ones below them were marked with the eye-catching word explosive. My expression was indifferent as I clicked in and read word for word. It turned out that some big influencer had exposed Clara's teenage diary. The girl had been in love with a shining boy since she was 16. She followed his footsteps, growing up alongside him. Even though her abilities fell far short, she firmly stayed behind him, giving up the chance to attend a top university in another province and willingly settling for a third-rate university near his school. Fortunately, the boy also noticed her sincere heart. In college, They fell in love and were about to walk hand in hand into marriage. But an evil female character barged into their perfect story. This person was her sister. This sister not only envied her perfect love but also led the bullying against her throughout high school. Even on their engagement day, she deliberately made herself absent to embarrass them. I read the heartfelt blog post from beginning to end. My finger moved, and I slid to the hot trending topic, where I inevitably saw comments excitedly stating, "Guys, I found the villainous girls weibo." The post even tagged my private account. Camille. Bane's expression was complicated as he reached for the phone. But I sidestepped, clicking into my homepage. As expected, underneath a recent weibo post where I shared a scenic photo, thousands of negative comments had flooded in. "Can you see this? They're a perfect match. You look like a clown in this. Camille, stop looking." Bane forcefully snatched the phone away, pressing my head down in front of him and ruffling my long hair. I took a deep breath, but didn't feel any grievance or sadness. I hadn't done anything wrong, and no one could frame me for it, no matter how much they tried. I calmed down and made a call to check on the trending situation. Sure enough, it had been artificially boosted, shooting up since the early hours of the morning and stabilizing at the top by this morning. I quickly determined who was behind it. Chad and Carter, each and every one of them. A perfect, romantic love story could greatly enhance the kin group's market visibility and favorability. Meanwhile, a stained reputation like mine would weaken my competitiveness against Carter and the company. Clifford, who had come over for dinner, was fuming as he paced around the room. "I really don't understand how they could do this. Are they even your family?" Driven by interest. "What family ties can we speak of?" I replied coolly. Bane rubbed his tousled hair irritably. "Clifford, do you have any experience with this kind of public relations?" "I do have some. Generally speaking, finding evidence to clarify is the best option. But we aren't prepared. Collecting evidence now would be too late since public opinion has already begun to ferment. So I recommend finding something hotter to overshadow it. Plus, the rumor about damaging relationships is easy to handle. As long as we can prove that you were the one who was originally engaged to Chad, public opinion will turn against them. But as for bullying, it's harder to prove. Even if you find teachers or classmates from back then to testify, if she claims they were bribed, public opinion will still side with her." Clifford looked at me with concern in his eyes. I forced a smile, taking out the USB drive and placing it on the coffee table. "This is evidence to refute the relationship damage. As for the bullying, Clara really didn't study at all back then. She didn't even notice such an obvious flaw." I let out a cold laugh. Just as rumors and insults were being hurled at me, a video began to circulate wildly on the internet. The cause was Bane posting a surveillance video on Instagram with the caption, "Such a melodramatic ethical plot." He was an internationally renowned sports star. With the World Cup currently in full swing, soccer was inevitably drawing the public's attention. At the same time, he is currently the only top player from our country playing in one of the top European leagues, which has garnered him a lot of attention online. With over 200 million followers on Instagram, the video he posted quickly went viral on foreign platforms and was soon shared on domestic sites, making it to the trending list on weibo. The surveillance footage was shot in the courtyard, with many angles, but they all tell the same story. A delicate and beautiful girl encounters a warm and jade-like young man beneath a tranquil floral wall. At first, the young man politely yet distantly greets her. "Hello, Clara." But the girl looks at him with a gaze full of admiration and dependence. "Hello, brother Chad. I have some math problems I don't quite understand. Can I ask you for help?" The young man furrowed his brow slightly but eventually nodded in agreement. From then on, they became increasingly familiar and began to stroll together in the courtyard, under the varying shadows of summer flowers. The young man would gently brush away leaves from the girl's hair. However, the story took a sudden turn. One afternoon, the young man came to the courtyard with red eyes and cornered the girl against the wall. Did you go on a date with that guy from your class? The girl hung her head, shrinking back as she replied. You're meddling too much. This has nothing to do with you. How could this not involve me? The young man's eyes filled with fury as he pinched her chin and kissed her. After a long while, he slowly released her. Clara. I understand now. The person I like is you. The girl burst into tears. Don't say that. You're Camille's fiancé. We. Don't mention her. Camille. Camille. Just because she made the provincial team a year earlier and got a direct pass. Why does she always have to act so cold and aloof? I can't stand her. Clara. I like you. I really like you. The young man embraced the girl. They fell in love. In the following period, they appeared more frequently in front of the camera, hugging and kissing. Yet every time they showed affection, they couldn't escape the presence of another person. Chad. Today it seemed like Camille glared at me. Do you think she knows something? Chad. Today is Camille's birthday. Is it inappropriate for you to take me out? Chad. These two are none other than Chad and Clara, who had appeared on the trending list that morning. And the netizens immediately exploded. This was not the innocent love story they thought it was. It was clearly a scandalous tale of a cheating man and a third party. Some people dug into Clara's identity. I checked. This Clara is living with the Lee family after her family fell into trouble. Someone else kindly took her in. And yet she said this is someone else's fiancé. How shameless can you get? Thus, some netizens began to turn against her, leaving comments on Clara's Weibo, green tea girl, calling someone brother every time. Does someone else's fiancé smell sweet? Others countered, Clara is a mistress. But that doesn't erase the fact that Camille is a bully. If Clara did this as revenge for the bullying, I think it's justified. However, that afternoon, the official account of my high school posted a blog entry. The gist of the content was that Clara entered a year later than me. While I was in my first year at the main campus, she was still attending middle school in another city. By the time she officially joined our school, I had already moved to a quieter branch because I was selected for the competition class. A year later, I went to the capital for university. In other words, during Clara's entire high school period, I had never spent a moment in the same campus as her. The bullying behaviors she described, like tearing books, splashing water, and mocking, could not have happened. That's why I said Clara didn't study at all in high school. Her eyes were glued to Chad, and she dared to fabricate rumors without knowing my true situation. At this point, public opinion completely reversed. During the time the online discussions were escalating, I took a trip to a ranch in the suburbs. This was a private ranch owned by Chad's aunt, Faithy. After receiving my call expressing a desire to discuss business with her, she arranged to meet me here. Bane, who insisted on tagging along, was mercilessly sent off to play with the horses. Faithy took me to an indoor tea room and personally brewed a pot of tea for me. Faithy is the old Mr. Kin's youngest daughter, only 32 years old, with her loose bun and half of her beautiful face shrouded in mist. She looked gentle, like a lilac in the rain-drenched alleys of Gyeonggan, not at all fitting the stereotype of a decisive businesswoman. I took a sip of tea and got straight to the point. I need this deal. Faithy laughed out loud. Camille, you're so straightforward. She stood up and walked a few steps, and I followed closely. So what do you have to convince me? From what I know, that sister of yours, Clara, also wants to get involved. If her design plans are on par with yours and she has the identity of the future young mistress of the Kin family, it would be hard for me not to lean toward choosing her. I fell silent, my gaze drifting through the large floor-to-ceiling windows, where I saw Bane leading a horse. However, he was quickly stopped by Clifford, who had come with him. They seemed to be saying something, and Bane reluctantly got off the horse. I exhaled and smiled at Faithy. Auntie, please believe me. My proposal will definitely be better than Clara's. And I can give you 2 more gifts. She became interested. What are they? I took another sip of tea. Since it's sportswear, you definitely need a spokesperson. I'll help connect you with Bane. That sounds good. I must admit I'm quite tempted. What about the second bargaining chip? I pulled out a silver USB drive and placed it on the coffee table. I know you wouldn't be satisfied with just inheriting a few subsidiaries. This has enough information to give Chad a hard time. If you use it well, you might even be able to knock him down from the position of potential heir and take it for yourself. What I said was quite provocative. But Faithy didn't show any sign of displeasure. Instead, she raised an eyebrow, signaling me to plug the USB into the monitor. I opened the surveillance footage stored inside. The story opens with Chad and Clara's encounter. Faithy chuckled. I've seen this video. It'll at most tarnish their reputations a bit. But it won't hurt Chad at all. I shook my head and fast-forwarded to the latter part of the video. And this is the gift I want to give you. It contained something Bane hadn't exposed in his video, the true incident where Clara killed my cat in an attempt to intimidate me. Something she desperately wanted to hide. Faithy's expression turned serious. After discussing business with Faithy, I went to the horse ranch. Bane provocatively glanced at me. Camille, want to race horses? Most of us in this circle learned so-called noble sports, and equestrians was one of them. Looking at the youthful vigor in Bane's eyes, I immediately felt excited and had someone bring a horse over for me. Clifford floated over, looking uneasy. Bane, don't put me in a tough spot. If you fall off the horse and break your leg, your manager and coach will skin me alive. Do you remember that Bundesliga's goalkeeper? He broke his leg just from skiing. Horseback riding is way more dangerous. And didn't the big boss hint at the goal of winning 3 championships next season? Once the World Cup is over, all the team's main players will return exhausted. And the hope of our club is all on you. Clifford rambled on. But I couldn't hold back and said to Bane, just wait here for a minute. I'll ride a couple of laps and be back. Bane shot me a resentful look. I mounted the horse and felt the crisp wine swirling around my ears. Back when I first learned to ride, I had wanted to ask the coach for the most difficult horse to tame. Even now, I still enjoyed that ultimate feeling of freedom. Many of my classmates laughed at my lofty aspirations. Young Bane, back then just a kid with mediocre grades, couldn't say anything profound but would shout back at those who doubted me. You don't choose a spirited horse because you're too weak. Camille is strong. Now, Bane was still smiling at me from the sidelines. As I rode past him, he yelled, "Hey Camille, you're riding really well." So, I smiled back at him. On the way back that day, I felt a bit drowsy in the car and unconsciously leaned against Bane's shoulder, falling asleep. In a daze, I heard him asking Clifford to adjust the air conditioning and then cover my legs with a thin blanket. I also vaguely heard him whisper to me, "For the weak, they tend to take pity on those weaker than themselves to highlight their own stature. Your father loves her because she is the illegitimate daughter of his first love. Your brother loves her because the soft little sister poses no threat to his inheritance. Chad loves her because she's always beneath him, always looking at him with adoring eyes. But you're different. Camille, you're the one who tames spirited horses. And you're the one who makes them feel ashamed of themselves. Those who love you will never betray you. And those who hate you don't need to be flattered. You're not lacking. You're truly amazing." Not long after the trending incident, I received a call from Carter. "Camille, did you get someone to make that trending topic?" His tone was weary. I smiled lightly. "You're calling me to ask. Why don't you check for yourself?" I want to clarify. I didn't buy the trending topic. It was boosted organically by netizens. Carter paused for a moment, then slowly replied, "The public opinion is getting out of control. I had someone remove the trending topic. But people online are still saying we're suppressing it." "Camille." He called my name. "The official WIBO account of the group is about to collapse." I really can't handle it anymore. Can you help me out? I didn't respond. And Carter continued. Clara's wedding is at the beginning of next month. I've contacted several mainstream media outlets and am planning to hold a press conference. Can you come help clarify things? I'm begging you. You don't want all of Mom's hard work to go to waste. Do you? My gaze fell on the coffee table. On the materials Clifford had sent 2 hours ago. And I let out an odd laugh. Brother. Do you really want me to be there? Carter readily agreed. All right then. Make sure you wait for me. After hanging up, I reviewed those materials again. 2 hours earlier, Clifford had come by, looking serious as he told me. Miss Camille, I have news about what you asked me to investigate. He laid out photos and other relevant documents. Following your lead, I checked Uncle Wayne and found he has a single son who's still in college. For some reason, he's developed a gambling addiction and dosed the loan shark over hundreds of thousands. This is a clear leverage point. I continued to investigate and found, just as you said, that it was your brother who bribed Uncle Wayne, making sure your car wouldn't be sent for repairs that day. As for the tampering with the engine, he hired someone else to do it. Here's the information on that person. I looked at the papers lined up on the coffee table and felt a tightness in my throat. Unable to speak. Camille. Bain called my name, and I snapped back to reality. What do you plan to do? He asked about how I would handle this situation. Should I swallow my pride for the company's reputation? Or should I disregard everything and confront Carter? Taking a deep breath, I answered firmly. Call the police. We have to report this. Bain smiled and gently nudged me with his arm. That's great. This is Camille. Camille shouldn't suffer any hardships or grievances. By the way, Clifford suddenly interjected, looking a bit odd. While I was investigating this matter, I found out that someone else is also involved in gambling. You wouldn't guess who it is. On the day of Chad and Clara's wedding, I arrived as promised. I sat in the audience, calmly watching the couple pledge their vows and kiss. Finally, Carter, as the bride's brother, took the stage to give a speech. After delivering a lengthy warning to Chad to treat Clara well, he finally turned the topic toward me. Today, in addition to wishing my dearest sister a happy wedding, I also want to clarify some of the unfounded rumors that circulated online not long ago. His gaze shifted to me, and a group of reporters wielding cameras turned their lenses toward me, snapping photos frantically. Ain instinctively moved in front of me to block their view. I pushed his arm aside and resolutely walked up to the stage. Dear friends in the press. I tapped the microphone and slowly began. Recently, there have indeed been many rumors circulating online. Carter visibly sighed in relief. The internet says that today's groom, Chad, was once my fiancé and that he got together with the bride behind my back. But this is a misunderstanding. This is just the tip of the iceberg. Carter and I spoke almost simultaneously. After hearing my words, Carter turned to me in disbelief. Camille, what are you saying? I ignored him and continued to address the crowd of reporters below. In the widely circulated diary of Clara, it mentioned my absence from their engagement party, which supposedly caused them embarrassment. Let me explain the real reason for my absence. The large screen behind us, which had been looping the newlyweds' artistic photos, suddenly changed to reveal a hospitalization record. That's because I was in an accident on the day of the engagement party. Camille, what nonsense are you talking about? Carter's face changed dramatically as he reached out to turn off my microphone. But it was too late. The screen displayed a timeline of evidence showing how Carter bribed Uncle Wayne, and how he hired someone to damage my car's engine. The scene erupted into chaos. Seconds later, the sound of cameras clicking became even more frantic. Camille, are you out of your mind? Carter's lips moved as he looked at me, pale-faced. If you keep causing this ruckus, the reputation of the company will be ruined. I looked at him expressionlessly. Since you know this would harm the company's reputation, why did you hire someone to kill me in the first place? It was clearly he who did wrong. Yet he tried to use the so-called honor of the group to morally bind me. How unreasonable could that be? Clear footsteps sounded from outside the hall. Carter turned to look and saw a team of uniformed police officers bursting through the door. I walked past him, brushing shoulders as I left him with one last remark. Brother, this prospective heir isn't doing well at all. From now on, I'll take over and show you how it's done. That day, Carter was taken away for further questioning, and my dad, unable to handle the shock, fainted on the spot. After I arranged for my dad to be taken to the hospital, a call came in from the board of directors. The content was nothing but accusations that I acted impulsively and harmed the company's reputation. I remained hurried as I took a car to the company. When I opened the door to the meeting room, the previously tense atmosphere suddenly paused, and everyone turned to look at me in unison. After a long moment, someone was pushed forward to confront me. Miss, your actions were too impulsive this time. By doing this, you've thrown the young master into the spotlight. Even if we find a way to get him out, the damage to the company's reputation is irreparable. I coldly replied. Getting him out is useless. Then don't bother. The board members exchanged glances, unsure how to interpret my words. I walked to the head of the conference table and slowly sat down. As long as you can guarantee your dividends, does it matter who the president is? What does Miss mean by that? A shareholder tentatively asked. The victim in this matter is me, and public empathy is more likely to side with me. Punishing Carter and compensating me is the outcome the public wants to see, not clearing Carter's name. Moreover, I clasped my hands together, my gaze deeply scanning their faces. I've been more capable than Carter since childhood. Choose me as your new president, and I will bring you greater returns than ever before. That evening, I held an online live-streamed press conference. In the live stream, I passionately recalled my and Carter's childhood and teenage years, tearfully expressing my confusion over how our once deep sibling bond had turned into what it is today. During the session, I glanced at the comments, feeling sorry for the sister. Internal family struggles in a wealthy family are really terrifying. Sister is really talented. No wonder her brother is so wary of her. I feigned a strong smile and began to elaborate on our brand's original intention, ultimately apologizing sincerely to the public for the public resources wasted in this farce. Finally, I announced that I would be taking over as the president of the group, and would provide even better services for all consumers. The comments were filled with cheers, support. Love to see strong female leads in stories. Sister is amazing. Turns out she won a national competition award. Girls can inherit family assets too. After the company got back on track, my dad called for me to visit the Lee family villa. He sat on the sofa, looking as though he had aged over a decade, gradually becoming unrecognizable from the tall man who had repeatedly denied me and favored Clara in my memory. I walked over to sit beside him, waiting for him to speak first. His hands trembled slightly as he reached out to stroke my head, but I dodged away. Camille, I know you're still angry with me. It's all my fault for your mother's situation, but Clara is innocent. I smiled at him and said nothing. He sighed and continued. As for Carter, I lack the ability. Only you can save him now. I beg you. I gave him a bright smile. Sure, if we want to save Carter. No problem. In a couple of days. Let's find Clara to discuss a specific plan. As soon as my dad heard this, his lips trembled, and tears welled up in his eyes. Camille. You. Dad is sorry for you. That rotten kid Carter is also sorry for you. 2 days passed in a flash. I accompanied my dad, who was using a cane, to the company. We used the back door, so no one noticed us. Clara was now working in the design department. I asked someone and found out she was currently in a meeting. So I took my dad to the tea room to sit and wait for her. After finishing a cup of tea, I finally heard Clara's delicate high heels clicking outside. My dad's murky eyes cleared up, and he quickly pulled me toward the door. Just as we reached it, Clara's voice came through before the door was even opened. Dad? What are you doing here? How did you get in? My dad froze. And sure, how Clara could know he was there when she hadn't even opened the door yet. But before he could say anything, another middle-aged man's voice came from the doorway. Clara, I'm not of money. Those debt collectors are after me. Can you help me out one more time? Out of money again? Didn't I just give you 300,000? What's going on? Clara snorted coldly. I don't have any money either. Go sell your liver or kidney. Just don't come to me again. You're the young mistress of the King family now. How could you possibly have no money? I said I don't have any. Don't have any? Then you should take me to see your dad and tell him about your background. Let's see if he'll give me some money. You, Clara. If I hadn't found out that your mother had a successful first love and tricked him into thinking you were his child, do you think you'd be living this good life now? Without me? You? I didn't hear what they said afterward because my dad's face turned pale. And he collapsed heavily to the ground. Dad, I cried out, sorrowfully crouching down and dialing the hospital. In a short time, my dad experienced a double blow from his beloved children and finally, as expected, suffered a stroke. After handling the hospitalization procedures for him, I went to the detention center to meet Carter alone. He looked haggard, with a circle of stubble on his chin, and his gaze was deeply locked on me. When did you find out it was me who arranged for the accident? I sighed. It was the first time I saw you when I woke up. Brother. I stood up and walked around a bit. When I just entered the hospital, the nurse called you. And you didn't even hear what she said before hanging up. Then Bane came. And the hospital never contacted you again. You clearly shouldn't know that I was in a coma after the accident. At that time, Chad asked how I ended up here. And you immediately asked how I woke up. My eyes flickered as I looked at him from a distance, slowly saying, your acting skills aren't as good as when we were kids. At least back then. I thought you really loved me. Carter let out a bitter laugh. Of course. I loved you back then. You were my only sister. But Camille, you're too smart. You want to be the best at everything, he said, clutching his head and sobbing in pain. Why do you have to compete with me? Can't you just be a good sister like Clara? I walked up to him, pulled out a piece of white paper from my bag, and spread it out on the table. Brother. I took out a pen and carefully wrote my name on the paper. I still remember. Mom passed away early. And it was you who helped me and taught me how to write my name when I was little. Carter's gaze became vacant as he unconsciously wrote his name on the white paper. Mimicking me. Yeah. Camille. How did we end up like this? I capped the pen, put the paper back in my bag, and coldly said, Brother. Since you've chosen to hurt me, you'd better pray that I never wake up. Carter was taken aback, somewhat confused about how my attitude had changed so quickly. It wasn't until he saw the white paper in my bag that he finally understood. Camille, you protecting one's own name is the most basic requirement for being a qualified businessman. But in that moment, Carter seemed to have forgotten this lesson that our family tutor had drilled into us. Perhaps he didn't expect that. Even at such a moment of sincere analysis, I, his cold-blooded sister, would still be plotting against him. Carter was so angry he nearly spat blood. I, however, walked out without looking back. After drafting Carter's stock transfer agreement, I went to the hospital again. The doctor told me my dad's condition was very poor. Continuing treatment would not only be time-consuming and costly but would also significantly increase the patient's suffering. I wiped away a tear from the corner of my eye and said firmly, treat him. I brought the stock transfer agreement. Even if I have to sell shares. I want my dad to receive treatment. The doctor sighed. Miss Camille, you are truly filial. I didn't know if, after today, there would be more comments online from bystanders saying they witnessed my act of filial piety. But I was sure that my dad, who couldn't speak while lying in bed, saw the agreement in my bag. with Carter's name at the end of it. His throat was constricted with anger. I gently comforted him, telling him I would come to see him again next time. After leaving the ward, I saw Bane sitting on a bench in the hospital corridor waiting for me. He held a cat carrier, and a beautiful American short hair poked its fluffy head out of the bag. He quietly said to it, "You call me brother now. So what should I call her?" "Wait. Sister is not good. Sister and I are siblings. Who wants to be siblings with her?" I cleared my throat and called his name. Bane jumped up. "Is everything done?" I nodded. He walked beside me, casually chatting. "Camille, you're so impressive. Your design is so intricately linked. At the same time," he said somewhat sadly, "you make me look so useless. I said I would come back to help you, but you handled everything yourself. Even the few things I did with Clifford. You could just buy some marketing accounts or hire a private investigator to do." I stopped and looked at him seriously. "Bane, who says you're useless? You've played a significant role." "What role is that?" To make me happy?" Bane was stunned for 2 seconds and cursed. Damn, but he didn't know I meant it. Because in the original plot, I would remain silent in darkness. But Bane came. He detached himself from the plot, unaffected by the female lead's halo. He told me, "Never betray." And he truly created a hole in my sea of self-doubt, shining countless lights, telling me that there were still people in the world who saw me as a treasure. Bane walked a couple of steps with his head down that suddenly perked up, turning around with bright eyes looking at me. "Camille, you think I'm useful, right? Since I'm so useful, do you want me?" "What do you mean by, want you?" "You're pretending to ask." He gritted his teeth. "At the end of summer, I booked a direct flight to Europe to watch my first soccer match in life. Before boarding, Faith called me. "Camille, Chad and Clara are at a deadlock now." I replied with an, feeling unsurprised. "A month ago." Faith used the information. I provided her specifically the last part of the video where Clara's biological father asked her for money to set a trap for Clara. As expected, to stabilize her position, she chose to steal Chad's bidding document to sell to the opposition in exchange for money to silence her father. Unfortunately, she was caught red-handed. As a result, shareholders from the Kin family began to question Chad's decision to change his engagement partner. They also started to doubt Chad's leadership abilities. Faith took the opportunity to rise to power, replacing Chad as the heir. Faith continued. "The old man has decided to send Chad to the provincial branch next quarter. Chad is furious and scolds Clara for dragging him down, saying if he had married you back then, he wouldn't have fallen to this state. Clara just said he's insecure. If he hadn't been jealous of your achievements and abilities back then, feeling overshadowed by you, he wouldn't have turned to her." Faith laughed. "It's really a dog-eat-dog situation." I glanced at my watch and said lightly, "Aunt, you don't need to tell me about their matters anymore. Whether they are good or bad has nothing to do with me now. I am going to do what I truly want to do." On the day of the match, it was a rare sunny day. The league was in full swing, and this match was the much-anticipated City Derby. In the first 20 minutes, both sides had exchanges, but neither opened their scoring account. Until the 23rd minute, Bane took a long-range shot from outside the penalty area, breaking the deadlock. As the first half approached its end, Bane received a long pass from a teammate, dribbled past several players, and scored, setting the score at 2-0. In the second half, the teams continued the excellent form from the first half, each scoring one more goal, ultimately finishing the match with a score of 3-1. In the first City Derby after the World Cup, they defeated the visiting team 3-1 at home, which excited nearly 80,000 spectators in attendance. They began singing the team's song loudly. The referee blew the whistle to announce the end of the match. The nearly 100 minutes of fierce battle did not extinguish the passion of the victorious players on the field. The home team began running around the field in celebration. However, Bane came running straight toward me. I was momentarily stunned as I saw him take off his outer jersey, revealing the white lining underneath. Clearly emblazoned and with bold black letters only Su Yi. The crowd gasped in unison. The 80,000 spectators and the live cameras around the world turned to him. He didn't seem embarrassed. On the contrary, he appeared even more open. Fans sang the team song, or chanted romantic songs. And the ground was a chaotic mix of letters. But for me, only the Chinese words he spoke were clearly audible. He said to me, "Childhood friends never betray. Bane will forever love Camille."